The air was the color of old blood and polished copper, as the sun bled out over the arid peaks of the Arizona Territory. Every shadow stretched into a lean, hungry thing, and the silence was vast, broken only by the rhythmic, exhausted sigh of the bay gelding. Finn Docella, his silhouette etched against the dying light, felt every single mile of the 2 years he'd spent deliberately putting distance between his body and his soul. He was a strong Native American man, his light tan frontier shirt worn thin by wind and labor, his leather trousers creaking with the movements of a trail-hardened existence. His long, black braided hair swung heavily against his back, a weight he carried like a chain. But the heaviest stone he carried was lodged beneath his ribs. The grief for Alma, his wife, and the cold, stinging regret for the child he'd left behind. He drew rein on the low rise, his eyes, usually the color of stormy gray, now holding a terrible, sorrowful reflection of the golden desert valley below. There it was, the homestead. The jacal walls, the line of thirsty cottonwoods along the Verde. It looked small, vulnerable, a broken vessel he hadn't had the courage to mend. The words of the letter, sharp and final, sliced through his memory. Elena Docella passed. Child needs her father. His mother, his last tie to this land besides his daughter, was gone. He had nowhere left to run. His heart, long encased in ice, lurched into a frantic, painful rhythm. There, in the dust of the yard, was Marisol. 5 years old, her dark braids still fly away, her dress faded. She was no longer the babe he remembered. She was a girl, an entity shaped by the time he had not been there. He started to dismount, his movements stiff with fatigue and fear. But the moment was seized by another. Marisol looked up, her wide, searching gaze passing over him without recognition. Then she flinched and bolted. She didn't run to the gate. She ran to the porch, seeking the skirts of a woman he had never met. This woman was young, frontier-hardened, with long auburn hair visible beneath a faded blue scarf tied neatly around her neck. Her arms instinctively went around the little girl, pulling her close, sheltering her. Marisol clung fiercely, her face hidden, her small body trembling. Finn's hand froze on the saddle horn. The heartbreak was physical, a sudden blinding agony that stole his breath. His own child, clinging to a stranger for protection from him. His face showed the longing, the desperate, visceral ache of a father who had forfeited his right to be the first comfort. He saw the woman look up at him, a look of quiet assessment, not fear, but a weary resolve that spoke of long, hard struggles. In that moment of sorrowful reunion, Finn knew he was the ghost, the unwelcome intruder into the life his daughter had been forced to rebuild without him. He was home, but he was utterly, irrevocably an outsider. The light inside the small, rustic cabin was a warm, soft pool cast by a single lantern, banishing the harsh, chilling reality of the night. Finn stood in the doorway, his hat held stiffly in his hand, the brim catching the amber glow. He felt large, clumsy, and utterly out of place. The wooden walls, though rough-hewn, seemed to enclose an intimacy that belonged only to the two figures before him. Alma Shaw, the auburn-haired woman, sat beside the cot where Marisol finally slept, her breathing quiet and steady. Alma wore a simple brown prairie dress, the blue scarf now draped over the cot rail like a discarded piece of protective armor. She wasn't speaking. She was humming a lullaby, a low, steady melody that carried the scent of wood smoke and clean linen. It was a song Finn didn't know, a new song that had replaced the lullabies of Alma Rosa. He watched her gentle hand smooth the quilt, a gesture of deep, unearned tenderness. Finn's gaze was fixed on them, a silent, cinematic realism unfolding before his eyes. He saw the exhaustion etched around Alma's mouth, the price of the constant care she had given. He knew that during the desolate 2 years of his self-imposed exile, Alma had been the anchor in Marisol's stormy world. A brutal wave of gratitude washed over him, immediately followed by the choking tide of sorrow. She is my daughter, but she is her peace. The thought was a painful mantra. He remembered the conversation they'd shared earlier, her unflinching explanation of her reason for staying. She needed a hand that stayed. Alma had stripped him bare with simple truth, demanding nothing. Finn felt torn. A desperate part of him wanted to sweep Alma into the center of his life, not just for Marisol, but because she held a quiet, steadfast strength his broken soul craved. Yet his conscience screamed that she was a stranger, an interloper, a temporary solution he had no right to permanently claim, especially after running from one commitment. He was haunted by the fear of repeating his failure. He was observing an act of love he was unable to fully participate in, and the emotional tenderness of the scene only deepened his agony. The silence in the doorway was not peaceful. It was a battleground where Finn fought his own past and the overwhelming burden of his sudden, essential need for this stranger. He remained rooted there, unable to enter the circle of light, unable to break the spell of the lullaby. The transition into morning was marked by a shift from intense private anxiety to quiet, grinding labor. The soft golden morning light poured over the small frontier homestead, washing the dry flats in a deceptive glow of peace. Finn, a man who sought solace in brutal effort, was outside immediately, repairing the leaning fence. His strength was undeniable, his movements efficient, his long black braids catching the light as he bent to his work. Yet his motions were mechanical, a deliberate shield against thought. His gaze, however, was repeatedly drawn to the open window of the jacal house. Through the frame, the scene was one of gentle, domestic harmony. Alma, her auburn hair glinting, stood patiently guiding Marisol's small hands in the process of baking bread. The child was focused, her tongue caught between her teeth, a faint dusting of flour already on her nose. Alma corrected her with a soft murmur, her hand resting easily on the girl's shoulder. The scent of wood smoke and rising yeast drifted out, the intoxicating smell of a home that was functional, warm, and alive. He paused, the hammer heavy in his hand, the sun hot on his face. The reality hit him with profound force. Alma was teaching his daughter the fundamental, day-to-day work of living and belonging, the lessons his mother should have taught, the intimacy his wife should have shared. He was repairing the outer shell. Alma was rebuilding the interior life. Quiet melancholy settled over him like the dust on his boots. He was the protector of the border, the provider of the raw materials, but Alma was the one creating the essence of home. He watched Marisol giggle at a minor mistake, turning naturally to Alma for reassurance. Finn realized the pain wasn't hatred or jealousy. It was the sting of resignation. He was grateful, profoundly so, but the gratitude was inextricably linked to the truth. He was an outsider in his own home. He had forfeited his place, and Alma, the stranger, had filled the vacuum perfectly. This realization did not make him want to send her away. It made him desperately afraid that she might leave. Finn lowered the hammer slowly, resting his chin on the handle, letting the golden light bathe his sorrowful face. He had returned to claim his family, only to find he now had to earn his way back into a new one. The simple domestic scene in the window was the hardest frontier he had yet faced. The evening settled over the homestead with a quiet finality, the golden light giving way to shadows that gathered secrets in the corners of the small cabin. Alma's work, always relentless, rarely ceased until the last streak of orange faded from the western sky. Tonight she was inside, preparing a simple meal, the scent of parched corn and beans comforting and humble. Finn found himself drawn to her, not with the abrupt need of the storm or the anxiety of a father, but with a growing, quiet curiosity. He needed to understand the resilience that fueled her, the core of courage that was no longer hidden beneath politeness. He sat on a stool near the fireplace, the shadows from the low firelight dancing across their faces. The only sound was the crackle of the embers and Marisol's even breathing from the cot. He began without preamble, leaning forward, his large, rough hands resting on his knees. "The cabin. The one you bought. It's a good piece of land. Took courage to claim it." Alma stirred the pot, her back to him, her posture tight. "It took years," she murmured, her voice flat, emotionless. She turned then, her eyes meeting his across the low flame. He saw a flicker of the shame she fought so hard to bury. "I wasn't like your wife, Mr. Docella. I didn't have family or protection. When the fevers took my folks, I was shipped to workhouses." She spoke the word with the bitter finality of a sentence. "From house to house. I was just a child, and I had no one to speak for me, no law to stand on. The firelight cast her face in sharp relief, a study in controlled pain. Some places the labor was just hard, but others— She drew a deep, visible breath, anchoring herself to the present. There was a man. He didn't just pay me wages for my hands. He thought he paid for all of me. He believed that because I was alone, because I was paid, I belonged to him. Every hour, every piece of my skin. Her eyes dropped, fixed on the rough grain of the floorboards, but her jaw was set tight as rock. I fought him the best I could for months. But a girl alone— The law doesn't favor the penniless. Finn felt a cold, deep rage twist in his gut, a fury that settled not on Alma, but on the invisible shadow of the man she had named Briggs in her mind. He was quiet, allowing the silence to validate her pain, not rush past it. She needed to speak it, and he needed to listen. I ran, she continued, her voice gaining strength, tinged with defiance. I saved every coin I earned, hiding it. I hoarded that money like gold, starving myself sometimes. I swore I would buy a place where I could stand without permission. That cabin, she motioned with a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, is the only thing in this world that is truly mine, where no man can put his hand on me because he holds the deed. Her shoulders were squared, thin and defiant, daring him to judge her as the world had. But Finn only shook his head, his grey eyes steady, full of a compassion she hadn't expected. A roof of your own, he repeated, letting the weight of the achievement settle between them. That's worth more than folks reckon. He spoke with the quiet conviction of an Apache man who understood the sacred necessity of sovereignty over one's own space. What he did says nothing about who you are, Alma. That man is poison, not you. His refusal to recoil, to ask for details, or to condemn her, broke through the armor she had worn for years. A tremor of relief, so profound it was almost visible, crossed her face. She looked away, blinking rapidly, unable to hold the gaze of this steadfast man who accepted her scarred truth without judgment. Men like that spread lies, she whispered, her voice tight. They tell people that a woman alone is ruined, that she's owed to the next man. She turned her gaze to Marisol, sleeping peacefully. Marisol, she reminds me of myself, all alone and small. But the difference is, she has a father who came back. The words were a quiet, powerful testament to his return, but also a deep, subtle reminder of his abandonment. The unspoken connection between them, born of shared isolation and newly revealed courage, intensified in the warm, rustic intimacy of the firelight. They were two wounded people, sitting at the periphery of their shared salvation, Marisol, finally finding a way to simply exist together. The quiet that had settled over the homestead since Alma shared her past was a deceptive thing, thick with waiting. Alma avoided the main road with the practiced instinct of a hunted animal, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon where the dry flats met the sky. Finn, though outwardly calm, carried his rifle with a new, heavier sense of purpose. The tension coiled tight in the pit of his stomach, the certainty that the peace was borrowed, that the snake from Alma's past was still slithering toward their door. He gave Marisol simple, stern warnings about staying close, explaining only that bad coyotes sometimes prowl. The waiting ended on a blisteringly hot afternoon. Finn was in the barn, the metallic scent of sweat and aged leather heavy in the air. When he heard it, the slow, deliberate thud-thud of a horse approaching, not with the hurried purpose of a traveler, but with the arrogant leisure of an owner. He stepped out, his senses instantly on high alert. The man dismounting at the gate was every bit the venom Alma had described. Briggs. Heavy-set, his face flushed and mean, his expensive hat and coat out of place against the honest dust of the farm. He swaggered, a bottle clutched in one fist, his smile wide and ugly. "Evening, neighbor," Briggs drawled, his voice thick with contemptuous pleasantry, letting his gaze sweep over the place before settling. Like a fly on spoiled meat on the doorway. "Thought I'd drop by." "See my old girl!" Alma appeared instantly, drawn by the sound of the voice that was the soundtrack to her deepest fears. She was pale, utterly rigid, a picture of primal defiance. Marisol, sensing the abrupt, frightening change, bolted to her and disappeared into the folds of her skirt. Briggs noticed the child's reaction, and his sneer deepened. Finn strode forward, every muscle tight and ready to spring, placing himself squarely between the venom and the sanctuary. "Mount up," he ordered, his voice flat and dangerously low. "You're not welcome here." Briggs took a step, planting his feet firmly in the yard. "Not till I have what's mine," he countered, his gaze slithering past Finn's shoulder to Alma. "She owes me years' wage. This, or she can pay another way." His eyes were full of vile intent, a challenge directed solely at the woman. Marisol whimpered, burying her face into Alma's fabric, her fear a palpable, burning presence in the air. Finn reached out, settling his right hand firmly on the worn wood of his rifle stock. He spoke with the cold, unyielding certainty of the desert rock. "You'll ride now, Briggs, or I'll bury you where you stand." Briggs hesitated then, the whiskey haze thinning against the palpable threat of death. He saw the truth in Finn's gray eyes. This was not a man bluffing over property. This was a man protecting his life. "You think you can hide her?" Briggs snarled, trying one last time to inflict damage. "She'll always be what she is." Finn took one slow, deliberate step closer, closing the distance, the rifle absolutely steady in his hand. He looked Briggs straight in the eye, delivering the declaration that severed Alma from her past and claimed her future. "She is Marisol's mother in all but blood. She is the woman who kept this house alive when I was gone, and she is under my protection." His voice was cold, final, carrying the weight of a legal decree on the frontier. "Now ride." Defeated by the resolute dignity of the man before him, Briggs cursed savagely, swung onto his horse, and galloped off into the rising dusk, leaving a choking cloud of malice in his wake. Alma sagged against the doorframe, her legs trembling with spent adrenaline. Finn lowered the rifle slowly. "You shouldn't have," she began, her voice a thin, reedy whisper, unable to reconcile his fierce defense with the shame she carried. He cut her off gently. "You don't carry his shame, Alma. Not anymore." Her eyes, wide and luminous, searched his face for doubt, for any crack in his conviction. "I thought no one would ever look at me and not see what Briggs left behind," she choked out. Marisol, small but resolute, pressed her hand into Alma's thigh. "Don't cry," the child whispered, her fear giving way to simple comfort. Finn watched them, a fierce, protective certainty rising in his chest. Briggs was wrong. Alma was not ruined. She was the courage that anchored his daughter, and the light that banished his own emptiness. He knew that the only way forward was with this woman, who had fought for her sanctuary and earned her place at his side. The silence that followed Briggs's forced retreat was not peace, but the heavy, charged quiet before a greater devastation. Finn knew the territory too well to mistake a mere shift in temperature for a relief in tension. The sky, for days, had been a sickly, bruised color, the air thick and stagnant, pressing down on the valley floor. He felt it in the tightening of his muscles, the way the horses stamped restlessly in the corral, the frantic, sharp clucking of the hens, all creatures sensing the world was about to break. He glanced west, past the line of cottonwoods, and saw it, a wall of thunderheads, purple, black, and immense, rolling toward them like mountains suddenly come alive. "It'll be a brute," Finn muttered, his heart sinking with the realization that this was more than just a typical summer storm. This was nature's fury unleashed. He saw the genuine raw fear in Alma's eyes, fear that transcended the recent threat of Briggs. Their own jacal house, with its patchwork roof and sun-weakened walls, was no sanctuary against this kind of torrent. "We'd best ride it out at your place, Alma," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "It's built tougher." They scrambled, hands brushing as they gathered blankets, a pot of warm beans, and the indispensable lantern. They raced toward her small, hard-won cabin, just as the sky ripped open and the first massive drops struck the dust, wide as silver dollars. By the time they reached the solid little structure, the rain was a stinging sideways blast and the wind screamed like a banshee. They shoved the door shut, securing the heavy wooden bar just as the storm hit full force. Inside the cramped, dry space, the single room felt suddenly tight, holding the terrifying external chaos at bay. Finn stripped off his soaking coat, water streaming from his black braids, feeling abruptly large and foreign amongst Alma's few neat belongings. the tin stove, the single cot, the small Bible on the shelf, the unexpected intimacy of the space, her personal sanctuary, now invaded by him and his child, caught him off guard, making his skin prickle with an uncomfortable awareness. Thunder cracked brutally close. A blinding flash and an immediate physical boom that shook the walls and rattled the shutters like insistent fists. Marisol cried out, jumping toward Alma. Alma knelt instantly, drawing the child close, her voice a low, steady counterpoint to the cosmic terror. "No, little bird," she promised, smoothing the girl's hair. "It'll rattle and roar, but we'll be snug as beans in a jar." Finn quickly coaxed a flame in the stove, and soon the room filled with the smell of smoke, wet wool, and the primal scent of safety. When Marisol, still whimpering, whispered, "Sing too, Papa," Finn felt the familiar lock around his voice, his song long buried with his wife. But Alma's eyes met his, urging him silently. He forced the old lullaby out, rough and halting. Alma joined him, her voice carrying the melody, a deep, resonant ground note. Their two voices, an uneven harmony forged in crisis, wove together through the storm's roar, a final, necessary shield that lulled Marisol to sleep on the small cot. Later, with the child safe, Finn and Alma sat by the stove, the flicker of the low firelight painting their faces in amber and shadow. The storm's drumming had dulled, but the tension remained. "You don't speak much of her," Alma finally said, her gaze fixed on the flames, giving him the opening he both dreaded and needed. Finn rubbed his calloused hand over his jaw, the memory still an open wound. He spoke of Alma Rosa, her quick laugh, the sudden brutal fever that stole her life. "I thought staying here would kill me too," he confessed, the words tasting of ash. "I left, put miles between me and the bed she died in. It was the only thing I knew to do." Alma nodded slowly, her understanding immediate and profound. "I wasn't much older than Marisol when I lost my folks. Sent to workhouses. One man, he thought paying wages gave him rights." She paused, drawing a deep, shuddering breath. "I fought him best I could, but fighting don't erase what's done." She looked at him, bracing herself for judgment. But Finn only shook his head, his jaw tight with silent, fierce empathy. "What happened to you don't change who you are. That man is poison, not you." Something shifted in her eyes, surprise and a fragile, profound relief. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a different kind of quiet settled, one built on the brutal, shared truth of their isolated wounds. Toward midnight, the rain eased to a steady patter. Alma found Finn returning from a brief check of the outside, soaked but secure. She sat on the cot, Marisol curled in her lap. "She woke crying," Alma whispered, her eyes weary but soft. "Asked for her mama. I told her both her mama and your mother are stars now." That seemed to settle her. Finn sat heavily on the stool, staring at his sleeping daughter. "She's had too many ghosts for such a small girl," he murmured. Alma laid a gentle hand on Marisol's back. "So have we all." Their eyes met across the lamplight, a long, unguarded look that acknowledged everything that had brought them to this desperate, intimate shelter. They had survived the external storm, and by sharing their darkest internal stories, they had forged a new, unbreakable shelter for themselves. The days following the storm were spent in grueling physical labor, mending, rebuilding, attempting to match the Earth's fierce resilience. Yet for Finn, the external struggle was a mere distraction from the fear that remained lodged in his spirit, the terror that the fragile peace he had built with Alma would shatter. He knew the debt of gratitude for her protection was immense, but he had yet to repay it with the commitment she deserved. Then the final, most brutal test arrived, silent and creeping. One cool evening, Marisol coughed. It was a small, dry sound, barely a catch, but Finn's blood ran cold. He saw the instant dread in Alma's eyes as she set honey water before the child. "It's nothing," Alma insisted, smoothing Marisol's hair, but her hand lingered, searching the child's forehead for warmth. By the next day, the cough had deepened to a ragged rasp, and the fever had come with it, a quick, punishing heat that laid Marisol limp on her small bed. Finn felt the terror of history repeating itself, the exact, sickening echo of the fever that had stolen Alma Rosa. He paced the floor, useless, his fists clenched, his mind screaming against the unfairness of the universe. He watched Marisol toss in a restless sleep, her small body burning, murmuring not just for Alma, but for Mama, and for the star stories. He sank to his knees beside the bed, burying his head in the quilt, his voice choked with raw, desperate prayer. "Please," he choked out, his shoulders shaking with the agony of potential loss. "Please don't take her too." He could not survive losing another light in this house. Alma was an absolute force, the only pillar in the room that did not tremble. She refused to yield an inch to the fear that paralyzed Finn. She stayed rooted to the child's side, a figure of sleepless, fierce determination. She bathed Marisol's forehead with cool cloths fetched from the spring, coaxing sips of broth past her dry lips, murmuring low, continuous vows. "Stay with us, little bird," she whispered, her voice husky with exhaustion but infused with will. When Marisol's breathing grew shallow and labored, Alma's own control broke. She clutched the child's hand, tears finally spilling onto the quilt. "She can't go," she cried out, the sound ripped from her soul. "Not after everything. Not when she finally has a home." Finn bent instantly, his big, rough hands trembling as he held both of them, the fragile child and the weeping woman who fought like a wounded lioness. He pressed his forehead against theirs, joining their desperate fight. "She won't. She can't. I won't let her," he vowed, a promise hurled into the suffocating darkness. They waged war against the fever for 3 days and 3 nights. Alma poured every ounce of her fiercely protected self into the battle. Then, just before dawn on the 3rd night, the fever broke. Marisol's intense heat broke into a heavy, drenching sweat that soaked the quilt. Alma lifted her head, disbelieving, her eyes searching the child's face in the faint lamplight. "She's turning," she whispered, a sob and a prayer tangled in the words. Finn pressed his hand to his daughter's cheek. It was cool, damp with the blessed, precious promise of life. Marisol stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Papa," she whispered weakly. "I'm here," he choked out, tears of relief blurring his vision. Her small gaze then drifted, anchoring on the face above her that had been constant through the fire. "Mama Alma, too." The words landed with the stunning force of a covenant, a choice made by the very heart of the family. Alma froze, tears spilling, unable to speak. Finn's chest ached with something immense and undeniable, something far greater than grief. "Yes," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Mama Alma, too." The stranger had not only stayed, she had saved them both. Marisol slept. Her small body, no longer racked by the fever's heat, lay in the deep, untroubled peace of a life returned from the brink. Her breathing was even and strong, a steady, rhythmic sound that was the sweetest music Finn had heard in years. Exhaustion had carved deep shadows beneath Alma's eyes, but she looked simultaneously more beautiful and more real than ever before. They sat at the small wooden table, bathed in the soft, forgiving light of the dawn filtering through the cabin window. The remnants of the past 3 days, the soiled cloths, the empty broth bowl, were scattered reminders of the battle they had won together. They were 2 figures utterly spent, yet charged with a fierce, quiet energy. Finn was the first to find his voice, his throat still tight with the emotion he'd been forced to suppress. "You saved her," he said, the statement a raw confession of his own helplessness and failure to his wife years ago. Alma shook her head, her gaze fixed on the cooling stove embers. "We both did," she insisted, ever resistant to taking sole credit. He leaned forward, covering her hand with his rough, scarred fingers enclosing hers completely. His voice was low, gravelly with certainty. "No, you gave her what I could not. Comfort when the fever scared her. She clung to you like a daughter to her mother." He remembered the sound of his child calling for Mama Alma, and the weight of that choice settled on him now, not as a burden, but as a direction. "She chose you." "And I." He paused, meeting her eyes, allowing no room for doubt or retreat. "I choose you, too." Silence hung between them, thick with the weight of years of loneliness now suddenly lifted. Alma searched his gaze, looking for the pity, the condescension, the withdrawal that always followed any moment of vulnerability in her brutal past. Instead, she found a fierce, unwavering truth. "I'm no one," she whispered, the old wound leaking its final poison. "An orphan girl with nothing but a patched dress and a shack. You deserve better. A woman, whole." Finn's grip tightened, anchoring her. He spoke with the clear, simple authority of the frontier, an authority rooted in what was proven and real. "You are the woman who carried my daughter through fire. You are the one who sings her to sleep, who brings light back to this house." He paused, his thumb tracing the rough line of her knuckles. "If that ain't better, Alma, then nothing is." His declaration was not flattery. It was a profound testament to her courage and her goodness. Alma was not defined by the poison of Briggs or the sorrow of her past. She was defined by her unconditional sacrifice here. Her breath caught, a sound tangled between a sob and a grateful laugh. Tears finally spilled, falling onto their joined hands, the tears she had held back through the fever and the standoff with Briggs. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I never thought anyone would look at me and not see what Briggs left behind." "I don't see Briggs," Finn said firmly. "I see Alma, the woman standing before me now, the woman I want by my side." She reached across and pressed her hand to his cheek. "If you mean it," she said, her voice trembling with monumental relief. "Then yes, I'll stay, later." When they lay exhausted on pallets near Marisol's cot, Alma's hand slipped naturally, instinctively into Finn's. He closed his rough fingers around hers, a simple bond forged not in passion, but in shared hardship and desperate prayers. He felt the connection as a deliberate choice, a partnership built to last. Marisol murmured in her dreams, one small hand reaching across the quilt until Alma gathered it safely. Finn watched them, his daughter and the woman who had become her mother in all but name, and felt a profound peace he had not known since Alma Rosa died. They had weathered every trial together, and Finn knew with a certainty as deep as the river's current that Alma was his future. The next morning dawned fully, the soft morning light filtering through the cabin window, bathing the scene in a hopeful glow. Marisol woke with a sudden fierce appetite, asking for honey bread. Alma laughed, rushing to the hearth to bake. Finn stood in the doorway, feeling the sun on his shoulders. For the first time since his wife's passing, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt whole, alive, and ready for the future. Winter finally yielded its brutal grip on the Verde Valley, a slow retreat that left the frost lingering long in the mornings, whitening the fence rails and turning the riverbank brittle. But by March, the sun stretched stronger, a firm promise made good, coaxing the first brave green from the ground. Meadowlarks sang across the fields again, their song a bright, effortless sound of renewal that Finn now heard not as a memory of loss, but as a current blessing. By then, Marisol had fully regained her strength, her small body vibrant and quick. She skipped through the yard, her bright ribbons bouncing in her braids, her laughter carrying like bells across the open air. The lingering shadows of fever and fear were gone, banished by the unwavering presence of her parents. The ache in Finn's chest was gone too, replaced not by emptiness, but by a fullness that felt sturdy and real. He had made his choice during the fever nights, when fear had stripped away all pretense, and Alma had made hers. Now, with the spring renewal as their witness, it was time to formalize that choice, to speak it aloud before God and the few neighbors who shared this vast, unforgiving land. It wasn't about show. It was about truth and acknowledgement. The wedding was simple, shorn of unnecessary fuss. Finn had no taste for ceremony, and Alma had no family left to invite, but the valley gave what it could, a testament to the respect they had earned. Maria from the fort sent loaves of sweet bread. Old Tom from the ranch north brought a jug of whiskey and his battered fiddle. A trader who owed Finn a favor arrived with bolts of fine, soft calico for Alma. They gathered beneath the tall cottonwoods by the river, the branches just beginning to show a tender, hopeful green. The air smelled of wet earth, wood smoke from the cook fire where Tom tended a beef roasting on a spit, and the clean, running water. Alma wore a dress she had stitched herself, plain white linen, meticulously sewn, finished with a blue sash that Marisol had fiercely insisted upon. She moved toward the riverbank with a quiet grace, her hands clasped lightly, her entire being radiating a fragile, hard-won peace. She was stepping away from a lifetime of solitude and fear, toward a future she had never dared to claim. Marisol skipped at her side, scattering the early wildflowers and tiny cottonwood buds like a flower girl in a grand city wedding, her dark braids flying. Finn wore his best shirt and string tie, his gaze never leaving Alma, recognizing the weight of every single step she took. The preacher from the fort, a man accustomed to the raw realities of frontier life, read the words. "Do you, Finn Docella, take this woman Alma Shaw to be your wedded wife?" Finn's voice, usually low and rough, was clear and firm. "I do. And do you, Alma Shaw, take this man Finn Docella to be your wedded husband?" Alma's voice caught, a small, barely audible tremor, but her gaze on Finn was utterly steady, filled with profound acknowledgement and trust. "I do." Marisol, who had been bouncing on her toes, whispered loudly, "Say the kiss part, preacher." Laughter, warm and rare, rippled through the small crowd. Finn drew Alma close, his lips gentle but sure against hers, a kiss of covenant and quiet promise. Marisol clapped her hands, her unadulterated joy echoing through the valley, sealing the commitment more completely than any prayer. The feast stretched long into the afternoon. Plates were heaped with beef and beans, mugs were filled and refilled. Tom took up his fiddle and couples danced on the packed dirt, boots kicking up dust. Alma laughed when Finn tugged her into the circle, his hand firm at her waist. She was a woman who had known only work and watchfulness, now surrendering herself to joy. Marisol danced between them, a whirlwind of happy motion, until she collapsed into Alma's arms, giggling. "Now we're real," she said, sleepy with happiness, her small hand pressing against Alma's chest. "A real family." Finn kissed her brow, confirming the truest kind of reality. That night, when the last guest had gone and the fire burned low, Finn and Alma sat on the porch steps. Marisol had fallen asleep inside, curled safe in her own quilt. The valley lay quiet around them, stars sharp against the dark, vast sky. Alma leaned her head against Finn's shoulder, the final, natural surrender of her long journey. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "A home, a family. I always thought I was meant to wander, to be forgotten." Finn took her hand, his rough fingers closing around hers. "You're not forgotten," he murmured, pressing a kiss into her hair. "You're the heart of this house, and you're mine." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant, a light finally permitted to shine. He kissed her again, slow and sure, while coyotes yipped far off in the hills, their wild song a background to the quiet miracle of their settled hearts. Winter yielded its final hold, and a lush, triumphant spring surged across the Verde Valley. The change was more than meteorological. It was an affirmation. The land, once a canvas of sorrow and dust, was now bursting with color, and life on the homestead had profoundly expanded. Alma's belly swelled with the promise of their child, and Finn, who had once defined himself by his endurance on the trail, now defined himself by his absolute devotion to preparation. He chopped wood until his muscles screamed, laid in stores of flour, and with his scarred, meticulous hands built a small, sturdy cradle, determined that this new beginning would erase the painful ghosts of his past. Marisol was the chief overseer of this creation, her energy unbounded. She followed Alma, her hand pressed often to the growing swell of her stepmother's belly, her mind brimming with questions that anchored the future firmly in the present. "Will the baby look like me?
Will it cry a lot?
Can I help rock it?" Alma would pull her close, her laughter rich and easy. "Yes, little bird. You'll be the best big sister." This was their everyday miracle, the simple, continuous renewal of hope, built entirely on truth and choice. The child came in the quiet safety of their home, a sturdy, healthy boy with a shock of Finn's own black hair. Marisol immediately declared him her baby too, carrying his name proudly on her tongue, Thomas. Life settled into a complex, harmonious rhythm. Days were filled with the joint work of the fields, nights with the sound of laughter and story, the rough edges of their individual pasts polished smooth by shared commitment. Alma still kept the small cabin west yonder, using it as a storehouse for preserves and herbs, a silent, powerful reminder of the solitude she had overcome. But her true, undeniable home was now the jacal house. She was no longer running, no longer guarding her shadow. She had risked everything on their fragile bond and found herself anchored. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, Finn stood on the porch with Thomas cradled securely in his arms. The baby, smelling of milk and clean linen, slept soundly, his small weight a profound comfort. Alma rocked gently in the chair beside him. Marisol curled contentedly at her feet, drowsy from a long day of play. The valley stretched before them, golden in the last forgiving light. The fences were mended, the fields were lush and green, and the river ran steady and clean. Finn breathed deep of the cool air, full of wood smoke and wild herbs, and felt a peace he had never known before root deep in his chest. Alma looked up at him, her eyes soft with wonder, her gaze tracing the strong, familiar lines of his face. "Feels like coming home after a long journey," she whispered. Finn pressed a kiss to her temple, his rough chin brushing her smooth skin. "It is home," he affirmed, his voice thick with finality and gratitude. "For good this time." Marisol stirred, blinking up at them through the dusk. "Mama," she murmured, "tell us a story before bed." Alma smiled, gathering the girl gently into her lap, adjusting the sleeping baby in his father's arms. "What kind of story, little bird?" Marisol yawned, settling her head on Alma's lap. "The one," she mumbled, her voice faint but clear, "about the lonely girl who found a family, and the man who was sad until he wasn't anymore." Alma's voice caught, a fragile, beautiful sound, but she nodded, accepting the title and the powerful truth of the story they had lived. "All right, little bird," she whispered. "Once upon a time." Her words rose into the quiet night, weaving the threads of sorrow and courage, fear and fierce love into something new, something complete, something that would last. Finn listened, his heart full as the bright, indifferent stars wheeled overhead, constant, just like his promise. And on the Docella homestead, beneath the vast Arizona sky, a family built from deep sorrow and simple courage finally lived whole at last.